Hello and welcome to Obscure Movie Reviews, where we love to take a look at some of the more unknown and ambiguous titles in cinema history. Here we focus on movies that are hard to find, on the older side, relatively unknown, or perhaps they simply lack in popularity. So sharpen your stakes and bone up on your German as we examine the creepy world of The Monster Squad. When Sean and his friends from their monster club discover that real monsters have invaded their town, they put a plan into action with the help of their kindly old neighbor. However, these monsters are led by none other than the Prince of Darkness himself, Count Dracula. While this film has garnered a cult following since its initial release, it went widely unknown for a long time. While the monsters we see are clearly from the classic Universal library, this movie is actually not made by Universal, but rather was produced by Taft Entertainment Pictures and distributed by TriStar. What we end up getting is a wonderful homage to classic 30s and 40s horror, with a modern twist that under normal circumstances would feel a little forced, but here comes off exceedingly charming. With a film that is essentially about children fighting monsters, which is sort of a B-movie premise, you'd think that it might suffer in the acting department. However, you wouldn't be more wrong. The child actors in this are some of the best of their time, coming off very realistic in their relationships with each other. They're brash, mouthy, overly bold, and arrogant, all while being remarkably unsure of themselves. Everything you'd expect from a middle schooler in the 80s. Heck, these kids even look like they're the appropriate ages that they're portraying. For the most part. With Andre Gower leading the young group as Sean, he had the forcefulness and ferocity of someone much older and more battle-hardened. This makes sense when you consider that his father, perfectly played by Stephen Mott, is a hardened and weary police detective. Mary Ellen Trainor reprises her role as every mother in an 80s teen movie, but brings a high level of emotion to this one that she doesn't often get the opportunity to show in other similar roles. The real standouts, though, are the monsters themselves. While a couple of them are silent or snarling creatures, a few are able to really shine. Tom Noonan plays a highly sympathetic Frankenstein monster, and his emotion shines through in a simple and straightforward approach to the character that's very reminiscent of the Universal portrayals, falling somewhere between Boris Karloff's and Lon Chaney Jr.'s performance. John Grease, an underrated favorite actor of mine, only has a few scenes as the human form of the Wolfman, but steals every moment that he's on screen, and you really feel his tragedy. Knock me up! But the standout performance is by far Duncan Regehr as Dracula. While he certainly is emulating the classic Bela Lugosi look, he takes it in a slightly different direction, choosing to have no accent at all, but a constant air of menace. Nobody phones it in, and they all run with the material, which could have been very farcical, but instead take it very seriously. The performances in this film are, frankly, way better than a film like this deserves. It's going to get a 9 out of 10 for having very well done performances. The Monster Squad has a runtime of 1 hour and 21 minutes, so it could hardly be considered long. That said, it has a rather large scale and feels like a longer film than it is. This is not an issue, but rather a compliment. There are some tense scenes that don't drag, but feel like they effectively cram a lot of content into a short amount of time. The viewer's never forced to take in more information than they need. The story is simple enough to process quickly, and the sense of impending doom is ever present throughout. The movie opens on a fun and chaotic action scene that sets up the stakes effectively. We're introduced to the main characters in short order and get to know them pretty quickly. Perhaps we're able to empathize with them well because most of them are children and children view the world through a simpler lens, or perhaps we see the adult world around them and remember our own plights growing up. In any case, the movie never drags in any area and never rushes anywhere else, taking the necessary time to establish every person and plot point that needs it. For that, it'll get a 10 out of 10 for having excellent pacing. Directed by Fred Dekker with cinematographer Bradford May, the movie is very well shot. It's reminiscent in areas of classic horror films, so shots that come off looking cheap or odd are easily seen as being on purpose, though it does occasionally lessen the quality. However, for lovers of classic monster cinema, there's going to be plenty of imagery and homage to catch your eye.
Understand?
The special effects are a little dated by today's standards in many regards, and it doesn't really hold up in those areas like other movies from the 80s might. However, where the movie really shines is in the amazing monster makeup by Stan Winston Studios. All of the monsters look awesome, and they are used to great effect throughout the film. While the Wolfman and the Frankenstein monster get a lot of attention on camera, the one that always stood out to me is the Gilman. While the original Gilman is iconic, this Gilman is downright terrifying, opting for a more animalistic approach that I personally love. While there's nothing groundbreaking going on in the cinematography department, they don't phone it in either, and have some very well-crafted shots. It doesn't all work for a modern film, but it was more than satisfactory for the time period, and a lot of it still holds up really well. So we'll be giving it a 6 out of 10 for having above average cinematography. Composer Bruce Broughton brings a sweeping and slightly over-the-top score to the film. Broughton, more famous for his sci-fi scores for such shows as Buck Rogers and The Orville, he's also composed such dramas as Tombstone and has won 10 Emmys in his time. The score of the Monster Squad fits well within the world that's created. There are also a number of very 80s songs made specifically for the film that fit well and don't feel out of place, but also easily get stuck in your head, which may or may not be a problem. However, the score and the songs are not particularly memorable in the long run, but they serve their purpose well, particularly early in the film. The sound effects elevate the soundtrack, particularly with the monsters themselves. The Wolfman's growl is imposing, and the Gilman has a very unique guttural roar. Sound is often used to transition scenes, creating the illusion of a fade where there was actually a cut. This is an old film trick that's employed well here.
Soon the creatures of the night shall rule the world. And there is no one to stop us!
Rudy, question.
Shit.
No need virgin.
Overall, the soundtrack will get a 6 out of 10 for being above average. The story is probably where the movie suffers the most. Written by director Fred Dekker and Shane Black, writer of the Lethal Weapon franchise, the story is simple and straightforward. While I am and always will be a fan of keeping the story simple and not convoluting it, sometimes stories can suffer from being oversimplistic. The main plot revolves around Dracula attempting to get his hands on an amulet, with the arbitrary number attached of once
Every 100 years, at the stroke of midnight.
The amulet can either be used in a ritual that opens up a wormhole into limbo, pulling in the nearby monsters and, it seems, everyone else too close to it, or it can be destroyed, which apparently would cause evil to rule the world. The kids discovering this plot mean to get their hands on the amulet first. Quite a bit of the film's time is spent making less than subtle nods to a lot of the film's source material, which most fans will find quite forgivable. Many of the monsters stay true to their original source characters, save perhaps Dracula, who is the most changed. This is in equal parts the most ambitious Dracula the screen has ever seen up to that point, and the greatest failure. While most versions of Dracula are rather short-sighted, this bloodthirsty immortal wants nothing less than world domination.
Wake up, old friend. It is our time.
No previous Dracula had ever set his sights so high. But his ambitions are short-lived because he's also thwarted by a group of heroes with an average age of 12 in less than a week. Mind you, monsters showing up to only be soundly defeated by unlikely heroes is a tale as old as time, but the amount of carnage these monsters spread in the meantime suggests that our teens should not have been as successful as they were, and perhaps Dracula's arrogance is what gets the best of him. Though the story is less than stellar, the dialogue is often exceptional. It works on some levels and falls short on others, with a few glaring plot holes that even bothered me as a child. That said, the story will get a 5 out of 10 for being just average. Probably one of the biggest reasons that this movie has gained such a cult following is due to its rewatchability. The movie maintains an atmosphere of fun the entire time. There are tons of tense moments, great characters, and a lot of quotable lines.
Don't take the church, it's religious.
Slots is what it is.
Put on an APB.
Already did. I'm a very good policeman, you know?
Wolfman's got gnar.
It's a quick watch, and there are far worse ways to waste an hour and a half. It's a true popcorn flick, and will receive an 8 out of 10 for having really good rewatchability. I've loved this movie since the moment I first saw it, which was when I was very young. At that time, I struggled to find anyone who had seen it, and it floated into obscurity. Thankfully, it has gained the following that I always felt it deserved. While Universal has definitely struggled to recapture the magic with their classic monsters in recent years, these folks made an exceptional movie that pays great homage to those characters without ever falling too deep into campiness. My major struggle has always been trying to identify the audience this movie was intended for. The protagonists are mostly under the age of 13, but the movie is too crude and violent for a young kid audience. However, it isn't gory or sexy enough to attract the 80s slasher crowd. Most fans of classic Universal monsters seem too old at the time to appreciate it, and only recently has a fan base truly grown. As a part of that fan base, though, I have to give it an 8 out of 10 for being a must-see, especially for fans of horror and 80s teen films. That means that the Monster Squad will scare up a 7.43 out of 10, making it a solidly good film. Thanks everyone for tuning into that obscure movie review. If you have any other obscure movies that you'd love us to take a look at, feel free to mention it in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and make sure you ring that notification bell so you can be up to date on all of our latest content. Content just like this.